There's more in these woods than dead boys. Still nothing, he shouts back to me. Nothing yet. We're knee-deep in the water, the river spanning about 200 feet wide. It's a smoother path of the whitewater rapids that course through here, but the river is still difficult to stand in. A constant rush, a constant weight against you. A little further north the rapids are, well, rapid, and just a little south, it gets to the real tough stuff. There was no reason this kid should have been on the raft. A group of rafters had come through the area earlier in the day, one family with their 6-year-old boy. About a mile upriver, he had fallen out of the raft. No one had seen any sign of him yet. The search parties were called in almost immediately, and Grant and I had come when one of those calls came in. The search party had combed up and down the river for about 5 straight miles, before the light started to dim from the sky. All of them had left, and decided to come back at first light. Grant and I decided to push on for a little longer. I know Grant had seen this kind of thing before, so it was almost personal to him. He didn't want another kid lost. I didn't want to leave him here to find the kid on his own, so I stayed with him and continued to look. I glance around, the treetops, the rocky ravine, the whole of the Appalachian Mountains as far as I can see. The kid could have been lucky and got to shore, and started walking through the forest. I take a deep breath through my nose, but probably not. I mumble to myself, "You say something, Katie." No, just thinking out loud, wondering where this kid could be. The sky was growing darker by the minute. I scanned the tree line a little longer, as Grant waded through the water, poking with his walking stick into the water. His khakis are dark and soaked entirely, his shirt saturated up to his armpits. He'd done everything besides dive headfirst into the water. I wade out towards him, ready to tell him we should pack it in and head back. "Hey, Grant, let's." "Katie, look." His voice not much more than a whisper over the rush of water. His eyes were focused, eyebrows drawn in. I follow his line of sight. A pen, blue with small caricatures of superheroes, like something a 6-year-old boy would have. But the pen was moving in the strangest way. It spun in circles that pushed against the current, and the nib repeatedly points in the same direction, upriver and to the far bank, for a few seconds before spinning again. It drifts right up and against my thigh. I pick it up, and look to Grant. His eyes are wide, and he's spinning around to move to where the pen was pointing. It's telling us where to look. He splashes and claws at the water, rushing as quickly as he can through the waist-deep river. "Grant, that's insane. That doesn't even make sense. You're grasping at straws." I push after him, putting the pen in my pocket. He's focused, though. He moves all the way to the far end, getting on the bank, and he's running upriver, feet pounding the stones. I barely have time to get out of the water before he's 50 yards up the riverside. I sprint, doing my best to catch up, my shoes soggy and chafing, my ankles raw, my khakis so waterlogged I have to hold my belt up with one hand to keep them from falling. I reach Grant, as he's staring into the water, unmoving, his arms limp at his sides, the rapids roaring in our ears. I stand beside him and look into the water. Hardly visible between the current is the child, several feet down, buried halfway under a large boulder. His eyes are open, mouth slightly parted, arms pulled up and sideways with the current. I look behind us, but there's no sign of any falling rocks from the Appalachias, no kicked up dirt, just trees, small stones, and sky. I put my hand on Grant's shoulder. I see the muscles working in the side of his jaw. How did he get under the rock? Where did that come from? I stare down into the water again. Grant is silent. I'm gonna call it into the station. I reach for my cell phone and feel Grant's hand grip my wrist. "What are you?" "Shut up, sit down and don't effing look up," he whispers, his voice urgent, but not aggressive. Before I can respond, he slowly kneels down, and pulls me with him. He's kneeling on his right knee, and his head is looking almost directly down, staring directly next to his boot. He ever so slowly lets go of my wrist. I try my best to replicate how he's sitting, my mind swirling in confusion. "What are you talking? Shut up, and don't look up." He's even breathing like he's afraid to do so, as though if he moves too much he'll be noticed, like he's trying to hide inside himself. I lean my head down, but just enough. I have to look. I can't not look. My eyes focus through the blonde strands of my bangs, out in front of me, across to the other side of the river. 200 feet away, on the other bank is something inhuman, like a deer, but some distorted version of a deer. 2 of them, creatures with brown fur, legs too long for their body, thin heads with antlers, their eyes looking forward, not on the sides like a deer would have. They walk with a slow shuffle upright on their hind legs, but their legs are strange, stretched. They shouldn't be able to support their body in such a way. They're thin with a neck about a foot longer than it should be, but the stomachs of the creatures bloated, swollen. Their arms look just like their legs, kind of positioned in front of them, hooves tapping gently at their abdomens. They turn together and stare directly at me. I force my eyes down. Immediately I can feel the sweat tickling at the back of my neck, cold spreading through my veins. I hear Grant, barely audible, each word with each exhaled breath. I said, "Don't look." I shouldn't be able to hear his words. The rushing water is only a few steps away, but it's dead silent. I can't hear my own breath. I don't even hear the sound of my own heartbeat thumping, just the pressure of it in my ears. Grant never looks up, but I can see him struggling not to shake with terror, his boot gently twitching against the stones. I lean my head lower, swallow hard, my throat dry and tight, tears stinging at my eyes. I dare glance upward, looking for their feet, still pointing in our direction. The sky grows darker. Time drags through in silence. I'm frozen, my neck is aching with the effort not to move, my tailbone screaming with the weight, my toes burning. Still they stare, their front hooves gently tapping against their swollen stomachs. Sweat drips from my face to the stones. It's been hours, sitting, unmoving. I glance to Grant. I can see he's breathing, but I can't hear him. His chest heaves, his teeth clenched, sweat glistening in his sideburns and along his temples. I dare one more look. They've started to shuffle along the tree line, head swaying, small hooves kicking at stones. They move like marionettes on invisible strings, ungainly, wobbling against gravity. I watch their backs, as they move through the trees, until only their antlers are visible, and watch until those are gone. The roar of the rapids is sudden and violent in my ears. I reel back from it. Grant exhales, like he'd been holding his breath for the last several hours. Likely he had. He stands, and I stand beside him, still watching the trees. I stretch my neck one side and the next, a series of loud cracks and pops. I look back to Grant. What the hell? With a speed so quick it causes me to flinch. He turns and grips my face with both his hands. The fear in his eyes is undeniable, a weight inside of him that has lived in him for years. Tears glistening in the corners of his eyes. "Do not ask. You didn't see them. What do you mean?" His teeth bared. He pulled my face closer, his nose only inches away from mine. His grip is firm, making it clear there would be no turning from his gaze. "You don't want to carry that knowledge. You didn't see them. You don't know them. Do you understand me?" A tear runs down the valley of his nose and cheek. "Do you understand?" His voice pleading. I hesitate, but there's no getting more info from him. I nod, slowly. He lets go of me, and turns and walks toward the mountain path. He doesn't bother to look back. What about the kid? What do we say when we get back? We never found him, Grant says, his voice calm and even. His fear had been so tangible, I can't think of anything else to argue.